Good afternoon. Ashley, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
Okay, we don't have many participants trickling in. Okay, it's 1:31 according to one of my watches and 1:32 according to my computer. So I think we can get going. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the Transportation Policy and Coordinating Committee to order today. If we can, I'm sitting in for Dave Strohmeyer as chair for the meeting. If we could quickly share information on how to join, Ash, that would be great. Or is that this meeting? There we go. So for anyone wanting to attend this meeting virtually, you can go to the city's website, and under the meetings tab, you can find information on how to participate. You can always call and leave a voice message by calling 406-552-6012. And there you can find other ways to provide your comments to the Transportation Policy and Coordinating Committee. And if we could quickly take a roll call for attendance, that would be great.
Becerra,
Present?
Mayor Ingen, MacArthur,
Present.
Johnston,
Here.
Olvera,
This is Ryan Hammond here for Lucia.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Slotnick,
Yes, here.
Strohmeyer, Boson,
Here.
and Thom.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Next, we're going to take a quick look to see if we have anyone from the public who might want to provide public comment. And I see one person, Deborah Postma. If you have any comments on any items not on the agenda, please let us know.
Just FYI, Deb is staff, so she's one of our transportation planners. So
Okay, I haven't met her yet, so I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Then yeah, let's promote her to panelist. Great. Have minutes to approve. Are there any changes to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, those will stand approved. And we will move to our first new item, new business item on the agenda, and that is review and approval of amendment number 3 to the fiscal year 2022-2026 Transportation Improvement Program. And Charlie is here to present.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty. So again, this is amendment number 3 to the FFY 2022-2026 TIP. I think it's a relatively simple TIP amendment, but there's a lot of new projects. So we have project cost changes in the addition of projects within this TIP amendment. As you go through the TIP document that's attached, you will see quite a few changes in the multiple funding sources table. And that is a table that represents the Russell Street project and the various funding sources that are used to fund that project. And so what I've done is I've included all of those funding sources within the multiple funding table that are seeing changes in this singular slide here. So we'll go through those. So on the multiple funding sources table, we have the Surface Transportation Program Urban, and this sees a project change for the Missoula Street MSO project entirety segment, which is UPN 412800. Preliminary engineering has been modified by almost $18,000 for some timely traffic data collection. And then the second project change in here is the Broadway to Idaho segment, and there has been almost $34,000 returned to this. So to represent those funds were not used within that segment. The Surface Transportation Program off-system funding section sees one change, and this is to the Missoula UPN 41280002, and there has been a construction cost increase of almost $45,000, as well as almost $11,000 of a different funding source provided by the state to make up for the bid overruns of various material items. Within the bridge program, there has been a return of funds similar to that of seen in the STPU funding section within the Broadway to Idaho funding section. And that's of almost or just over $45,000 there. So now we have a bunch of new projects. They're all under the same UPN, so same project designation of UPN 5536, and there are 2 funding sections that will be funding these projects. They all are durable pavement markings of different project areas. So I'm going to go through those project areas. We did have discussion in TTAC about how adopted plan roadway designs can be included for some of these project segments, and there's a discussion within city and MDT of how that can be achieved. So the first project is on West Broadway from Reserve Street to Madison for construction cost in FFY 2022, as goes for all projects of $170,000. The second project is Orange Street from Brook Street to the I-90 interchange for $150,000. We have Russell Street from 39th to Broadway for $112,000. We have Brook Street from Mill Creek Road to Van Buren Street for almost $400,000. Fifth Street from Madison Street to Higgins Avenue for almost $16,000. In the same project designation, we have Surface Transportation Program Primary, funding more of these durable pavement markings projects. So on the same project segment 39th to Broadway on Russell Street, we have an addition of almost $55,000 to fund that. And then East Broadway project segment from Van Buren Street to Speedway Avenue, we have almost $80,000, again, for durable pavement markings. Within the Highway Safety Improvement Program funding section, the SF 189 Missoula high tension median cable rail project is seeing a cost increase, and this has to do with bid increases. And it's important to note that a majority of this project is not within the MPO planning area. So that's for the project as a whole, those cost increases. This is a slide to prompt our next agenda item having to do with the UPWP that John will be presenting. Within the 5307 transit funding section, we have $180,000 noted towards planning, and John will explain how this is related. It's a Mountain Line Cares funding sub-allocation that's being represented in 5307, originally from the 5311 funds. So there will be a UPWP amendment to explain how this $180,000 is being used by Mountain Line. The last addition of projects and changes has to do with a new funding table, the FWP Recreational Trails, and this is a grant that Missoula County Parks Recreation won. It is to construct the new Meadows Trail System. There's a preliminary engineering cost that will be funded this fiscal year of $18,000, as well as incidental construction and construction for a project cost of just over $80,000. And then there's been an update to the 5339 Transit Administration funding formula, and it's an increase to our funding allocation of double of what it previously was. So now it's just over $500,000. And that is it for our project updates. Just as a notice, we've followed our adopted public participation plan notice, and we have posted our legal advertisement for 5 Sundays following this TPCC meeting. Something that we stay on top of is as amendments come in through or information comes available to the amendment, we post it on our website and an update to the information within our latest news so that people can go to our website and see sort of the latest tip amendment materials we have available. Then we have Aaron online to discuss some details of Cmac funds.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And this, maybe we can have this discussion quick before we get to the, well, it's not specifically related to this tip amendment, but it is related to our Cmac funds. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the street sweepers and how we might be planning to fund those over the next couple of years, because things are in flux. I think we mentioned maybe at one of the last TPCC meetings that our attempt to do a sweeper lease fell through, that ended up not working out for a variety of reasons. And so we are back to applying for a waiver from the Buy America requirements to be able to purchase sweepers. But sort of the caveat here is that it's been, 5 or 6 years since we've been able to purchase a sweeper. And so both the city and county equipment is really getting to or probably beyond its useful life. And so it brings up that question of, how do we purchase enough equipment that we can continue operating those sweeping programs with equipment that is new enough to be functional. So what we've looked at, in the past, we've typically funded 1 to 2 sweepers or flush trucks a year for the city and the county. And we'd essentially budgeted for about that cost in the lease. So doing about $250,000 a year for each the city and the county, which would allow purchase of one piece of equipment every year for each the city and the county. Because of that aging equipment, we're looking at the possibility of wanting to just buy it sort of all at once or all in one fiscal year, so we could get new equipment out there and replace that aging, the aging sweepers and other flush trucks, rather than just doing one a year and trying to limp along with the older equipment. So what that would mean is a big purchase in, say, the next fiscal year, FY23, assuming we get the waiver approved. Again, that's sort of still up in the air, remains to be seen whether that will happen. But if it does, we would like to be able to buy more equipment in that first year, and then essentially we wouldn't have the annual expense in the years after that. So it'd be a larger upfront expenditure and then less or no spending on sweepers for 3 or 4 years, and just getting on maybe every 4 to 5 year purchase, or maybe we could sort of start to spread that out over the next 5 or 6 years. So we're not doing it all in 1 year, but would like to be able to get new equipment into the city and county hands so that we can keep those programs going. Charlie, I don't know if you have the Cmac table in here. I think just want to go back to that really quick, just so we can look at what it means. Essentially, we have plenty of funding in our current reserves, or sort of federal balance in our Cmac program. So you can see our carryover into FY22 was about $4.5 million in federal funds. And we had planned to spend $1 million on sweepers in FY22. So our carryover into FY23 should be more like $5.5 million, give or take. Since we're not spending that $1 million in FY22, and we have an existing carryover. So all that's to say that we should have plenty of money available in FY23 to purchase the sweepers. One of the reasons I wanted to have the conversation at TPCC now, because we have this TIP amendment, we're not proposing to change this, but both the city and the county are sort of quickly running into budget season, and will likely have to make decisions on the local match for those sweepers before we get a new TIP adopted this summer and fall for the sort of FY23 through 27 fiscal years. So I just wanted to get a sense, we don't need to necessarily make a decision, but get a sense from all of you and from the committee on whether you would support that approach as we start to develop the next TIP for FY23, if you would support having that bigger purchase in 1 year, and then sort of trying to figure out how we manage it in future years, but maybe shifting to more of a all at once kind of purchase instead of this certain amount every year.
Aaron, what's the local match? Is it 20% or?
It's 13.42%. So, if we're spending $1 million or a little over $1 million, like say $1.2 million for the city and the same for the county, the local match on that is close to 200,000, I think, give or take. Could do the calculation, but in that ballpark. I mean, really, you can see here in the funding source column. So there's the local match and the federal for what we would have spent over those 5 years of this TIP, and that's probably in the ballpark of what it would be for a single year purchase. So around $175,000. So it's a big chunk of change, and I think we just need to be ready for that. It would be hard to come up with that on the spot, I think, without it being in the budget for the city or the county.
Yeah. Debbie, go ahead.
Aaron, well, I can see the value, like equipment is going to start breaking down or being so much to maintain that it becomes more of a hindrance than a help. I do have concerns with doing sort of a big bulk purchase, though, in that in the future we're going to have the same thing with aging out equipment in the same year and in the future. So I like the idea of spreading it out. and I don't know how many units this like equates to, but maybe doing it over 2 years so that we don't get a bunch of equipment aging out in the future at the same time and being faced with the same thing, like having to go and be sure that the local match is there.
Mhm.
It's both sides of the coin there, but I
Yeah.
can see value in spreading it out over 2 years, maybe because of the match dollars, and also because I have a concern with the life of equipment and being faced with this again in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit of a conundrum, and that I think makes a lot of sense. So I can bring that up with Shane and Brian on how that works with their program too.
Is there a way to do both, lease some of them and purchase some of them, just to make sure that we have the right number of the right amount of equipment, or is that complicated? And I guess, I think it's always important to think about the maintenance of the equipment. If we purchase it, is it different than when we lease it? And so then the cost for maintenance should also be calculated. Just wondering, are we responsible for the maintenance of the ones that we're leasing also?
I believe so, and I'm not sure if Vicky's on this call. Oh, she is.
I am.
My recollection was that the lease agreement, ongoing maintenance of the equipment was the responsibility of the city or the county, not that it wouldn't be covered by the company that we're leasing from.
Okay.
Is that right, Vicky?
Yeah, that's totally correct. And the company that we were trying to lease from then sort of made it kind of difficult from a maintenance standpoint about what they wanted to see. Certainly when the lease was ending its life, how they wanted to see things maintained. It was kind of untenable for the city and the county.
Mm.
And also, to speak to Debbie's point, I think we need to keep in mind that just the way things are going in terms of getting equipment and getting things ordered and supply chain issues, that we could certainly, want to get 8 pieces of equipment in 2023, but boy, howdy, there's not a guarantee that would happen in 2023.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So I think if folks are good with that, we'll bring that forward and at least let Brian and Shane know that we can purchase, do a more of a bulk purchase, and I'll work with them on how many pieces of equipment they could live with versus what they would love to have in a perfect world. So maybe that helps kind of split the difference with what you were saying, Debbie, in terms of spreading it out over a couple of years. So the one other thing on Cmac, we'll be bringing forward some projects for programming in the next tip. There's a couple of good ones out there that I think are kind of rising to the top, and we have some opportunity on. So we've got one of which is just to let everyone know kind of what might be coming, the South Avenue Bridge project. We've been working with the county, and I've been working with MDT to make sure we can get good non-motorized facilities on that bridge. And so bringing a little bit of Cmac to help cover the difference on that project will hopefully help get us a shared use path or sort of the right facility to connect across the river. And then we have a number of other projects that we have in development. So hopefully we'll have some good projects to bring forward to fund. We've got this big balance. We've been wanting to sort of get some projects funded, and I think we'll have a few to bring forward for consideration this summer. So kind of exciting to be able to build something with Cmac.
Yeah. Josh?
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
Have you heard from MDT about their willingness to use their bridge fund to address some of those non-motorized issues on the South Avenue Bridge? Or are they still saying it's all on us? And is CMAC going to have to cover all of that, or just some? I guess that's my question.
I think where we've landed is that it would cover some, and this is just from initial conversations. I think we still need to hammer out that agreement, but we would be essentially covering the additional cost above for so any added width of the bridge that's necessary for the shared use path. And so it wasn't the full cost of doing it. It's just sort of, there's a couple of feet of additional width that are needed to make that fit from the design that MDT was looking at. And so I think it, it was in the range. Well, I don't know exactly what the cost estimate will be, but it's not sort of full cost of a shared use path in addition to the bridge that they were anticipating building. It's realignment of some of the planned space, and then there's a little bit of extra that's needed to fill that gap. So
Okay, thanks.
And Josh, this is Bob. And
Hey, Bob.
in addition to that, I believe the discussion is that the trail portion that's necessary off the bridge, we obviously can't use bridge funds for. So that's just on the bridge itself is the one part of that as well.
So I think we were looking and hoping between Cmac and potentially open space or the trails bond, being able to connect that shared use path to existing trail on South Avenue. But just that's kind of one project that we have in the works that might be a good opportunity for Cmac to leverage those funds to get something that would be much more costly to go back and retrofit later.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's really important that we connect the path on the bridge with the existing paths on South Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, anything else, Aaron?
Nope, just wanted to bring those things forward and have some conversation now, but we'll certainly have the official requests coming this summer. We'll have a draft tip in June or July for consideration for adoption in August. So
Great.
Thanks.
That'll be right before budget for the city at least.
Yeah, my hope is that we get a little ahead on any local match for those projects, just because it'll be pretty tight if we're adopting in August, and city and county budgets are typically being adopted right around then too. So hard to make changes that late in the game.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we have looking for a motion for the tip amendments.
Yes, we're looking for a motion, and I would like to entertain any final comments or questions regarding any of the actual tip amendment changes that were presented just earlier, if there may be any.
Any questions?
Looks like potentially none.
I was just curious to know why that significant increase in federal transportation transit, the close to $500 and some $1,000. Is that unique and new, or do you think we should expect to receive more from now on?
I might have Vicky or Ryan, if Ryan is here, speak to that. But that was an adjusted upward allocation through formula funds. So I think sort of we're shown that this is our new value for this year's allocation. Maybe they have sort of a reasoning behind those larger formula funds being made available. It might have something to do with our newly adopted federal transportation bill. But I do not know the exact details behind that, or if it's sort of something we expect to see more commonly in the future.
And so I think Shirley did a great job. I'm not exactly sure either. Transit is a mystery to me sometimes.
Okay, well,
And I guess just to jump in here, some of the changes over the last few years in transit, there was a fair amount of, CARES Act funding. There's the increase in formula funds. Mountain Line has a few grants. We've been trying to, over these amendments, adjust some of those numbers to better reflect what's happening on the FTA side, because we weren't always showing what was happening, or we weren't always getting all that info from FTA. And we've been doing a better job, I think, of coordinating with Mountain Line and getting FTA more involved in this process so that we show accurate numbers. So as we go, that's some of those changes. And there have been a number of transfers into transit from other funding sources over the last 6 months or a year. So all in all, I think a good sign for transit that we have some additional funding to work with.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. I don't see any hands up for questions, but still looking for a motion.
Mirta, I could do one.
All right, and we need a second.
Seconded.
Okay, all of those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Right. Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, that was stands approved. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And we now can move to the UPWP amendment number 1. And John will present.
Yep, thank you for that. I have the memo here that was included in your packet for the agenda today. Mountain Line received $180,000 in FY20 CARES funding, and they'd like to allocate this funding for the strategic plan update for the Missoula Urban Transportation District. Charlie mentioned the pointed out where these funds live in the TIP table. And so this is because they are planning funds, it also requires a UPWP amendment. So that's what we have here today. So Mountain Line will engage with a consultant to update the 2018 long-range strategic plan and comprehensive operation analysis. This update will include the current environmental and financial status of the public agency, as also in preparation of the updated transit development plan, the TDP. So you can see in the UPWP, these planning funds live in section 502, specifically related to preparation of the updated transit development plan. You can see here the highlighted in the yellow is the updated values. The table below is the previous values. So you can see the total of $180,000 being allocated there into the 502 table. As I mentioned, these funds will be used for the strategic plan update, laying out their blueprint for future transit services in the region. This plan is updated every 5 to 7 years. As I mentioned, 2018 was the last time this was updated. We presented this to TTAC on April 7th. They approved it, and today we recommend that TPCC approves the FY 2022 UPWP Amendment 1.
Great, thanks, John. Any questions? I'm not seeing any. Debbie?
Oh, I had one. Sorry. John, I just wondered, did Mountain Line have this programmed for maybe starting next year or the year after, and just using this opportunity to move it forward in time?
I think Don is on the call. He's welcome to speak to that, but my understanding is there was this previous $60,000 and $15,000 allocated, and then this CARES funding came along, and the Mountain Line felt it appropriate to be used for their strategic plan update. I'll hand it off to Don if you have anything to add or correct that.
I thought that was pretty good. I mean, I think that we are taking advantage of the funding opportunity. Certainly believe that a lot of things have changed in the last 4 years. It feels like we just did our last comprehensive operational analysis, and yet it also feels like a completely different setting, and development patterns are changing rapidly in the valley. So we're anxious to reevaluate patterns of development, rethink routes. And of course, we're also in the process of hoping to relocate our bus barn, and that will have some impacts on our service as well. So bunch of things came together. Seemed like it was a good opportunity to move forward just a little bit ahead of the sort of mandated 5 to 7 year schedule.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Any other questions, comments? Okay. We do need a motion. Who would like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Great, thank you, Don. And we need a second.
I can second.
Great, thanks, Josh. So all of those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Right.
Okay, any opposed? So that carries, and we'll quickly look at any public for comment. Seeing none. Okay, that will stand approved. Thank you, John. And we don't have any other new business, but we have a presentation on the Higgins Avenue corridor project under old business. And Aaron, I believe that's you.
Yeah, thanks. I kept this item on the agenda, sort of rolling over from last month. I had gone through a presentation as we had started to kick off our most recent round of public outreach for the Higgins corridor project. And so it had gone through the design concepts that we had, some of the evaluation and trade-offs. And I believe it was Commissioner Strohmeyer had suggested, I don't know that we had a ton of time to actually discuss and get this committee's full feedback on that. And so I guess this agenda item could be as quick or as lengthy as we want it to be. But just knowing that we are wrapping up that, or have more or less wrapped up the public engagement. We have our steering committee meeting, I believe next Monday, or maybe it's the Monday after, to go through all that feedback, the analysis we've done, and try to land on a preferred alternative. So this is, I'm not going to say this is sort of the last chance for this committee to weigh in on those alternatives, but it is good timing ahead of that steering committee for any last feedback from all of you on which designs you're really from the MPO perspective or TPC's perspective really meet the needs for our region, or other thoughts or comments on each of these design alternatives that you think we should consider as we're going into that final concept development over the next several months. So maybe just by way of reintroduction, I'll just quickly go through the different concepts and some of the trade-offs, and then we can have discussion. And if there's any thoughts on direction from this committee, yes, we should move forward with a particular alternative, or generally leaning towards one or the other with caveats, we can do that. So
That's good.
let me share my screen here. All right, can you all see this? And rather than go through the slideshow, I thought I would just use our interactive open house website, because I do think it kind of walks through each of these concepts fairly well, and is a good resource. So I think starting with, so if you'll remember, we had developed different concepts for the north side of the river and the south side, based on sort of the different contexts in terms of downtown versus south of the river, and the available right-of-way that we had. So I'll start with the north side concepts. And if you'll remember, there were sort of three different alternatives that we could look at, one being the no build, that's sort of retaining what we have out there today. Concept A was a 4 to 3 lane conversion that improves the bicycle facilities from a striped on-street bike lane to a raised protected bike lane. And then concept B was retaining those 4 travel lanes and removing a lane of parking removing parking from one side of the street in order to get those raised protected bike lanes. So again, each one of those concepts, there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of available parking, available capacity to move vehicles through, ability to make left turns, the safety benefits of going from a 4 to a 3 lane conversion. So a lot of different trade-offs that we have to evaluate here. And just going through what those look like. So, existing conditions today, I think we're all familiar with that, where you have the four lanes of for vehicles, 4 through lanes. You have typically left turn prohibitions to maintain that flow and level of service. And then striped on-street bike lanes that are adjacent to parallel parking, so tend to be more stressful. You have the risk of getting doored as someone's getting out of their car. They're harder to maintain. You can kind of see here the snow and ice that tends to accumulate there in the winter. But you do have parking on both sides of the street. So some advantages of that include maintaining the motor vehicle capacity, especially primarily if we retain those left turn prohibitions, and it doesn't impact on-street parking. But it does create more stressful biking conditions, hard to maintain in the winter. We don't get those left turn movements at the signalized intersections. So as we think about front main 2-way conversion and some of the other improvements downtown, that's sort of a limit on vehicle operations. And then we have fairly narrow lanes through there for both freight and transit that not so much on the north side. I mean, they're still fairly narrow, but not quite the extent that we see south of the bridge. And we have seen crashes, that there are about 6 injury crashes a year reported on this section of Higgins. And we think we can help eliminate some of those with the 4 to 3 lane conversion, just by potentially reducing the number of conflict points. What that 4 to 3 lane conversion looks like is just a rendering. You can kind of see there's what we have today, and this is what it looks like with that center turn lane, raised bike lanes separated from traffic by the parking lane, and retaining parking on both sides of the street. And then the benefits that we get out of that design is that we can get that protected left turn at the intersections. That really ties into the front main 2-way conversion, provides better circulation around downtown, not just through Higgins. We can likely improve safety with that 4 to 3 lane, reducing the number of crashes. Today, if you do turn left, you're turning across 2 lanes of traffic and trying to watch out for bicyclists and pedestrians. It's just a lot of things to watch out for, and sort of a more challenging environment. And then it improves business access for people biking. So that protected bike lane, there's lots of really great evidence that going from an on-street, particularly a door zone bike lane, to a protected bike lane has a lot of accessibility benefits for people biking and safety benefits. There's even some recent research that shows protected bike lanes can improve safety for essentially all modes on the street. There's looking nationally at all of these projects and the safety benefits, that there's some evidence that protected bike lanes don't just improve safety for cyclists, but for other modes as well. Yeah, the trade-off is that we get some additional motor vehicle congestion. So it could take an additional 30 seconds to a minute to travel between Front and Broadway during the PM peak period. That is under our higher growth scenario. If you remember, we evaluated traffic under sort of current trends, which is essentially flat growth or no growth over time, versus sort of the higher end, what you might see from assuming 1 to 2% growth a year over the next 20 years. We do see some congestion over that higher growth period. So, and then the final concept, you can see we have retain the through travel lanes. So keeping that left turn prohibition, getting protected bike lanes and the benefits associated with those. But the trade-off is we're losing parking, and it's about 21 parking spaces between the bridge and Broadway that we would lose by removing that parking. So trade-off here, you get some additional throughput in vehicles. You get additional safety for people biking, but you lose some on-street parking, and you don't get that kind of circulation benefit or safety benefit of doing the 4 to 3 lane conversion and having protected left turns for people who do want to turn left. So that's north side of the bridge. South side concepts, generally fairly similar. We have the no build, what's out there today. We have concept A, which is a 4 to 3 lane conversion that has striped on-street bike lanes, similar to what's north of the bridge today. Concept B takes that one step further and adds the protected bike lane by removing one lane of parking. And then concept C is one we'll spend some time on, but it's creating a dedicated center running transit lane to prioritize transit movement through here. So looking at those, what we have out there today, we again got four travel lanes with left turn prohibitions. So sort of emphasizing movement of traffic along the corridor. We have on-street parking, but there isn't enough right-of-way to have bike lanes currently with the 4 travel lanes. And I will say that one thing we heard a lot and we have definitely observed is those lanes are all really tight. So that we're basically at minimums or just under minimums for our travel lanes and parking lane. And so you get a lot of conflicts with side swipes and broken mirrors or buses not being able to fit very well down Higgins. And cyclists share the lane with the outside lane of traffic. Much like the 4 lanes north of the bridge, that no build alternative maintains our motor vehicle capacity and doesn't impact on-street parking. And I should say doesn't impact the number of spaces. It probably impacts the quality of that parking space in terms of sideswipe conflicts. But the concerns that we've had and we've seen are that we don't have bike lanes and that we do see about 1.5 crashes a year involving people biking. And that's just reported crashes. It doesn't include all of the close calls or stressful biking environment that's there. You don't get left turns. Left turns are restricted, but that doesn't restrict left turns into driveways and other places along the corridor. And so those tend to be, anytime you have somebody turning left into the gas station, that's delaying traffic behind them and backing up through the corridor. And then those narrow lanes, they're tight for transit, freight, basically everyone else. In the winter, you're down to like 1.5 lanes in each direction. And that we do see a number of injury crashes reported on Higgins that we could help address through some safety improvements. So then first option, remember, was doing a 4 to 3 lane conversion, adding on-street bike lanes and maintaining parking on both sides of the street. So this would look similar to the north side of the bridge with the exception of having 2 travel lanes instead of 4, and you have that dedicated center left turn lane. So the benefits we get out of that is it provides that left turning movement. So there's more accessibility into driveways and parking lots and onto the side streets to access the hip strip as a destination. It's increasing the comfort and safety for people biking. It's maybe not as comfortable as the protected bike lane, but you're providing space. And it improves the amount of space that's on the street. So we're able to get more standard travel lanes. So it's more accessible for buses and freight, and overall improves access to businesses for people driving. The trade-off is that we get that potential motor vehicle congestion might increase under that higher growth scenario. So taking maybe an extra 15 seconds to over a minute to travel between Brooks and 4th. But you only see that during the peak hour. You don't really see it at other times of the day. And it really doesn't provide the low stress biking facility that we're really wanting to get, that we would recommend for a facility like Higgins. So it's getting a space, but not the sort of all ages, all abilities space that we would want to see. So the next step up would be going to a protected bike lane. In order to get that with the 4 to 3 lane conversion, we also have to remove parking from one side of the street. So in this alternative, we still maintain a lot of the same benefits that we see in concept A, but we add the benefit of having protected bike lanes, so more of an all ages, all abilities facility. Trade-off here is you lose parking on one side of the street, and I believe it's about 8 to 10 parking spaces, which is not as much as you might think, particularly compared to the north side of the river, primarily because of all the driveways, bus stops. There's a lot of uses of that space on the west side of Higgins that there's just not a lot of current parking there today. So you lose some parking, but it's not as much as you might expect based on losing it for the entire stretch of Higgins. And then finally, as a reminder, the concept C is kind of the really transit focused concept, where you have the dedicated two-way transit lane running down the middle of Higgins. You would have a center boarding platform for buses, where you have a bus stop, and that is also where the buses can pass each other. Trade out, so you can really prioritize transit movement through the corridor and the efficiency at which transit operates, because it has a dedicated space. It doesn't get caught in traffic or have to compete with that space with motor vehicles. We're still able to get protected bike lanes on parts of the corridor and parking, where you just have that center lane, but where we have the center platform and the bus boarding lanes, we're down to just a striped on-street bike lane and no parking. So it just takes a lot of extra width to accommodate that in the middle of Higgins. So some real trade-offs on this one, where we're really emphasizing transit movement. We're still providing some bike facilities and parking, but we're really down to 2 lanes of vehicle traffic, and you lose those left turn lanes because you're replacing it with a bus only lane. So the most impactful on motor vehicle operations, but really prioritizes transit. We also think that it's tight enough in here that we might have to lose some sidewalk width in order to accommodate that, at least as we have it lined out now with the parking, and particularly with the center platform. There's just not quite enough width there without taking a little bit of the side. So you lose maybe like, I think 2 feet, a foot to 2 feet of sidewalk space on both sides of the road with this alternative. I think there's some opportunity to play with those measurements and look at how we're allocating space, but certainly a concern with this design that we would be impacting pedestrian space. So those are the alternatives. I'll stop sharing my screen for a minute and just talk a little bit real briefly about what we've heard so far in our conversations. We've had a lot of really good conversations with businesses, both on the north and the south side of the river. And what we're hearing is that they pretty much across the board for the businesses, they seem less concerned about traffic throughput than they are about parking and sort of that circulation and access, that they sort of see the conflicts that happen with potential left turning movement, where people can't turn left to get if their business is just off of Higgins or if they have a parking lot, and really see the safety benefits of the 4 to 3 lane conversion along with that sort of circulation and access. So there was generally I'm not going to say like full consensus on sort of the concepts that have the protected bike lanes, but generally like sort of consensus in that direction, with some concerns, not wanting to see, so much congestion that people don't want to come downtown. So I think there was a little bit of concern on sort of that high growth scenario, but realization, understanding that the circulation and some of those other benefits would likely offset any traffic congestion impacts that they might see. So I think really good. And then just thinking about not just the type of parking we have that's on the corridor, but the quality of it. So I think in the hip strip section south of the river, there was a lot of recognition that those lanes are really tight. Anyone that's parking out there, it's hard to get out. They're getting damaged vehicles, and that it's just not working very efficiently today for their purposes. And they would much rather see the better accessibility and smoother flow and the ability to have left turns and sort of those other kinds of safety improvements. General public as well, when we held meetings and through our surveys, definitely a majority supported the concepts with protected bike lanes. There was a little bit of back and forth on, particularly south of the river, whether to lose parking and go with protected bike lanes or just do the striped on street. I think the majority who would rather, were leaning more towards on street striped bike lanes were concerned more about the businesses having access to parking. And if you could mitigate that, then I think we're more supportive of the protected bike lanes. So I think a lot of general consensus leaning towards the protected bike designs. And at the same time, still having it, we had a lot of conversations about the transit concept, and is that what we should have in the future if we get the BRT route along Brooks and that ends up running down Higgins, and how do we design for that eventuality in the future with that, while still being able to do something today. So not necessarily that influenced which alternative we would pick, but that I think what I heard is that we really need to think clearly about what type of investment we're making now, when we maybe don't have the need or the capacity to run sort of a center lane dedicated bus route, but still have opportunities for enhancing transit access in the future. So I think that's a challenge, regardless of what alternative we go with. We need to figure out how that sort of can be transitioned into better transit service in the future. Paraphrasing a little bit there and shortening, and Don, feel free to weigh in on from the conversation with Mountain Lines Board, but I think there was a lot of interest in transit, but just not, I don't know that anyone was really convinced that the center lane route is what we would want to build today. So I think that's a sort of a little bit of a conundrum for us, but I think there are some design opportunities to really think about transitions, or, how do we get to that eventuality while still doing something beneficial today. So with that, I think I'll leave that to any comments or thoughts. I'd be really curious if there's additional input from this committee, or if you have thoughts on sort of which design concept should be rising to the top, or you would want to recommend, the steering committee consider as a preferred, or if there are other considerations that whatever we move forward, we should include in the final design alternative.
Hey, Aaron, could you
Yeah.
just talk a bit about the process on how this choice is made?
Yeah, so I mean, we've gotten all the feedback on these alternatives over the last 4 weeks or so. We'll take all of that to the steering committee. The steering committee will then recommend, we're hoping that we can land on consensus within the steering committee on a preferred alternative that we can then take and do some more analysis. We haven't really done intersection design, all of those sort of pieces that would need to come next. And then we'll take that preferred alternative back out for public comment and sort of vetting again. So before we bring it back to all of you for final approval, and to city council for approval, that we have that next round of engagement and conversations. And in the meantime, we, between sort of now and then, we have continued conversations with MDT to make sure that this works on their end too. And so I think, long story short, it's a combination of steering committee recommendation based on public feedback and our analysis, coordination with MDT, and then what we think we can make work in sort of the final design. So maybe one of these with tweaks, or I don't know. I think there's still some room for creativity with whatever design we bring forward.
What's the role of the public in the steering committee? How does that, does the steering committee hold public hearings, or is it all just sending comments at this point?
Steering committee, I mean, those could be open meetings. I mean, we don't advertise them as such, but we have business representatives on that steering committee. We've got MDT, city, try to make that as broad as possible. But really that's the group that kind of, I think, is helping us make the decisions on sort of how to proceed. But that's where I think your input now would be really helpful to say, like, yeah, from TPCC's perspective, like, this is what we think we should move forward.
So you're hoping we can speak with one voice today?
Potentially. I mean, I don't think it's required, but
sure.
It would be nice to know if there was consensus, that would be really helpful for us.
Hey, Aaron, this is Bob. I apologize. Someplace when you quit sharing, I heard you say, I'm going to quit sharing my screen, and shortly thereafter I got dumped.
Oh,
so I don't know if you called on me or not. And I wasn't ignoring anybody. I was in a scramble of trying to get back into the meeting and trying to find the right link and everything. So I'm back.
We did not call on you yet, but I'm happy to. If you have thoughts or questions, now's the time, Bob.
I guess I do, and I apologize to the group. I maybe am not fully up to speed with what's been discussed in the previous meetings. There definitely are some concerns from MDT. I mean, let's not forget about the elephant in the room to the tune of a $30 million elephant right in the middle of this project. The MDT went through a lot of time and effort to come up with the proper 4-lane road with extremely wide shoulders on it. Or not shoulders, but shared use paths, very innovative shared use paths, very expensive shared use paths to get that wide, ultra lightweight cantilever situation. And so, you know, it's not saying it's insurmountable, but we built the facility that the community at that time was supportive of, getting a wider, safer bridge to handle traffic. And then before we're done with that project, we're looking at reducing capacity. We just built a huge component of infrastructure to carry capacity, and now we're talking about throttling back the capacity. That's something. I mean, it's a challenge. It's a struggle for us, and that's something that I will tell you. I think everybody here knows I spend a fair amount of time in the press. And I don't want to be going alone explaining why we built this monstrous bridge to handle capacity. And before we're done, we're looking at reducing capacity for the, you know, it's for that route. And so that's the number one thing that I just really, it looms big, probably because every time I'm in Missoula, I'm having discussions about the Higgins Avenue Bridge and what an awesome bridge it is and all the stuff we're going to do with it. So, you know, not to say it's not insurmountable. I'm curious to hear what Ryan's thought are on it as well from FHWA's perspective, though.
Well, it's maybe a cliched response. You've heard a lot from us a lot lately, but we well, the broad statement I'll make, which maybe you haven't, it won't be new either, is that I think there are, as a general rule, maybe fewer hard and fast federal shall nots here than maybe a lot of people assume. I mean, there's a general idea here, of course, that we don't want to make huge financial investments in assets that then aren't utilized as intended. So I don't know whether or not something like this would be in that category or not is maybe an interesting conversation. But so there's that general principle. But again, I think as far as actual, you know, thou shall get X number of years or cars to use X asset before X asset is modified, that kind of thing doesn't exist. And beyond that, we try really hard to allow local priorities to be reflected in the projects that we fund. So I don't know, I mean, maybe this all sums up to, I don't think this is the sort of thing that we would break a tie over. We just, you know, our primary interest is making sure that the kind of dialogue that's happening right now takes place, and that, you know, local interests and state interests are both accommodated to the maximum extent possible, which, you know, as I hear myself saying that, I know that's in many ways kind of just a cliched non-answer, but I think that's the message you'd hear from us.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate, you know, obviously one of the things that we're always trying to be cognizant of is making sure that we're being the proper stewards of the tax dollars. And we also, that from our program standpoint, we don't get ourselves in a position where something becomes, you know, partially not fundable or unfundable because we didn't meet the intent of the project or whatever. So that's well,
right. And I'm glad you mentioned that buzzword intent. I mean, that sort of thing, we still, you know, once a purpose and intent for a project is identified, we, you know, expect to see that project develop consistent with that purpose. So, I mean, yeah, that sort of thing is true, but and you know, in general, I appreciate all the comments you just made. I mean, we want y'all to be good stewards of the federal tax dollar as well. So appreciate that orientation and that you know, default setting, if you will.
Yeah, and that was my concern. You know, the purpose and intent of Higgins Avenue Bridge was to carry 4 lanes of traffic and have a great multimodal component in that the shared use path that's, extremely wide and stuff. And so if we change the purpose and intent to make it a 2-lane facility with a transition to a turn lane over part of it, are we still meeting purpose and intent as that project was brought forward to FHWA and its development? And that's one of my big looming concerns.
Yeah, understood.
So Ryan, did you have an answer for that? Is that a yes or
Well,
a no or a maybe?
Yeah, I mean, we would want to take a look at the language there, and this is starts to get maybe a little above my pay grade, because some of these decisions are hard because, right, we make these big investments. I think, as Bob rightly put it, that at the time, at least we hope so, and I think is the case here, is that when the decision was made to go forward with a particular project with a particular design, I mean, that was supported by the community at the time the decision was made. And again, at least we hope that's true. That's the idea. Oftentimes, community priorities change rapidly in the face of dynamics that are changing rapidly on the ground. And, we want to accommodate that too. This gets back to, again, it's not that you have to get X number of years of use out of a project once a dollar is spent. It's a little more art than that kind of science, to use that cliche. So, I mean, I'm not prepared to green light or red light here, but I mean, it's the right type of question to ask for sure. Yeah. And this goes to a broader conversation I know we're having. It has relevance in Missoula and a lot of other communities, about just this idea of, when there's this umbrella of federal, I should, just so you can see my face, there's this umbrella of federal concerns and federal guidelines. And then within that kind of operating space, state and local actors, and through the NPO and otherwise, will they'll set their own boundaries within that umbrella. And there's lots of things where, I mean, some of the concerns that Bob's representing here, are totally valid. And there are things that MDT may want to put boundaries around that we would support, even if they're not the kind of boundaries you'd find in a federal regulation. But we try to, again, as a kind of a guiding principle here, to be as flexible as possible to not put handcuffs on a project that don't need to be there. But that's not to say that other entities involved here, including the ones in this room, might not have valid reasons to say no to something. So again, that's a lot of gobbledygook, because I hear myself say it. I know that I sound very bureaucratic. I'm cognizant of that, but this does represent, kind of a tricky thing that is as much art as science. So
Ryan, just it's not the worst case scenario, but a conflicty type case scenario. What if the steering committee comes back and says, oh, they want to recommend the 3 lanes with the protected bike lane? What then? If do we get in a situation where then how do we check to find out that if that reduction happens reduction to accommodate that happens on the bridge, that we're not going against the intent that FHWA laid out? And if we are going against the intent, does that mean the state has to pay the money back, or we have to pay the state back, or what's the worst case out of that?
Yeah, I mean, paying money back is pretty rare. I haven't seen it in my brief time here. I mean, that happened very rarely on the transit side, which I am more familiar with. So no, I mean, I think having to pay back money isn't. I think if you're talking about a state route, and so if you're going to manipulate the state route, you need state approval for that, which MDT may or may not be inclined to give. Mm-hmm. MDT would, for something like this. Again, we're having this open dialogue, so it wouldn't be news to us. But once it goes beyond just a concept that through an action like this would be kind of the folks in this room giving formal voice to their support for this in concept. If it were to move beyond concept, then MDT would check in with us, and then we would render a decision there, and then that's when we would really get into, yes, what was the purpose and intent at the time the project was made, how long ago was it, you know, and that becomes more of a, at that point, obviously that's planning ramifications, but it gets kind of out of my area. I mean, that, like so I was saying earlier, I mean, that would kind of be a decision made probably above my pay grade. Paying money back is again, is very rare in situations like this. You're taking an asset. I mean, I guess the way that you would think about it in those terms, if the change was so dramatic that it basically accounts or amounts to taking an asset out of service, I don't think we'd
That's not
see
the
it that
case
way,
here.
but
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the charge that is given to the steering committee. Are they thinking about what's the best design north and south of the bridge? Or are they thinking about what's the best design north and south of the bridge, given that we have to fit that design within these parameters outlined by FHWA and MDT? And those are two different questions.
I agree. And I guess my advice to go forward in the very immediate term here is to advance the concept this body thinks is best for the community. And again, if that kind of concept were to be implemented and some of the harder questions get asked and answered, well, then that can take place at that time. But I think it's important for this body to accurately reflect your collective
Great.
preferences at this point.
Thanks. That's a good answer.
Okay.
And I think just jumping in here, obviously this, I agree with Bob that it's, you know, the bridge is something that we have to tackle, and we have not wanted to yet without knowing sort of where we would land on the alternatives. But it's not to say that it's not one of the more important pieces. And I would also just add, I think, you know, the development of the bridge project, while it wasn't done in a vacuum, was done ahead of a decision of sort of what is the best design for Higgins on either side of the bridge. You know, we had work that came out of the downtown master plan. We had proposed doing this sort of study 5 or 6 years ago before the bridge had started construction. And, you know, so now here we are with the bridge that's sort of a little bit ahead of an analysis of what is the right design for Higgins. And so I think we are just in this point where we need to navigate that and figure out what the best solution is. So while I think it's a challenge, I don't think, I mean, my personal professional opinion is that the space on the bridge is not going to go to waste, that added capacity is going to be used for something that benefits the corridor and travel along the corridor. So I agree with Bob. I think it's really challenging and we need to figure that out, but I don't think it's insurmountable, at least from a design concept and sort of how we manage the consistency of the entire corridor and facilities along the entire corridor. Because one of the challenges we have is that it changes, you know, like every 3 or 4 blocks, the context of the corridor changes, and that creates a lot of, you know, difficulty for people traveling where they're navigating. You know, conflict happens when you have change. And so anytime you're changing facilities, you're creating safety issues and conflict between modes or within modes. And, you know, one of the goals of this project is to try to figure out, like, what is that consistent corridor and what does that look like so we can mitigate those kinds of issues. And like I said, I think that the bridge as it's currently being constructed doesn't change that. You know, we can work within what's there on the bridge and use that space in a way that is effective. It just might be a slightly different use of that space than what is currently being anticipated.
Yeah, Aaron, I appreciate what you just said, and I agree with you. I think it's going to be challenging. I don't think it's insurmountable. I think this group has shown that we can work together and come to a common endpoint that works for everybody. And then the other thing that you brought up that I wholeheartedly agree with, and one of the concerns I have is in some of the renderings that you showed is that transition and change as you go a couple blocks and then we make a change and then we go a couple blocks and make a change. And that's really concerning to me, regardless of what the configuration is. But when we start having people traveling in a lane and all of a sudden they're in a lane that becomes a parking lane and we expect they're going to make a shift that's all well and good in May, June, July, August, when our paint, well, let's go with June, July, August, and September, when the paint is fresh and good and people know what they need to be. But there's a lot of the time of the year when either the paint stripes are worn off or they're covered in snow. And I cringed literally when you showed a couple of those concepts, thinking of, you know, the locals in the area are going to know where they need to be. But when I come down to visit family, I'm going to be not sure where the hell I'm supposed to be in some of that. So that consistency you brought up is a super valid point that I think we need to be very cognizant of as we come up with a design. Is how are we going to let people know where they need to be so that we do keep everybody safe?
Yeah.
I might just, if I could jump in for a couple of minutes, the Mountain Line did see this before. Aaron came and presented to our board last week. And there were a number of sort of comments that sort of riff off of, I think, where this conversation is going about, you know, how does in scenarios 1 or 2, how does transit stops actually work? You know, they're not really completely figured out yet. There were some questions about, you know, the intersections at Front and Main and how, when that was going to be two-way and in relation to our stops and all the users. And I think the answers were that stuff is not figured out fully yet. And obviously the design will, you know, improve and morph as we give some direction to staff to pursue one of these concepts. And I think, I guess I would say the other, just to speak to the center lane concept, we, you know, of course, are interested in the Brook Street corridor and the continuation of Brook Street corridor center lane transit idea up to our transfer center somewhere. And in our, you know, current thinking, we've always imagined that was happening on Stevens and Orange because the right-of-way is bigger. In many ways, it would make more sense in terms of where the riders are if it was along Higgins. So, you know, it's a thing we're interested in, but we've been, you know, as we talked about it at the board meeting, we are concerned about, you know, diminishing the pedestrian experience of the corridor, particularly in the hip strip area, in order to support a robust transit experience. That feels like a wrong-headed thing. Like we want transit to be really integrated with a awesome pedestrian experience. So that concerned us, and I don't think we came to a conclusion as a board, but I think none of us felt ready to say, yeah, we're all everybody's on board with scenario 3 that Aaron presented. And I think we're also concerned about the sort of consistency that Bob was just talking about too, about you know, zipping in and out of a buses kind of doing a zigzag crossing streets and then going back into their lane on the side as we go north of the bridge. So there was a lot of discussion about it, interested in the concept, but I don't think anyone felt like the Mountain Line was ready to just say everybody's pitching in behind the transit-oriented scenario. Anyway, I guess, and vis-a-vis the bridge, that was another question that we had, was how do any of these concepts integrate with a bridge? And, you know, how do they sort of transition across the bridge from one thing to the other? And again, I think Aaron's described it well here, as he did at our board meeting, of not totally figured out, but we're pretty confident we can figure it out. So I'll just take the plunge of weighing in to try to say something that is, you know, actually reflects my own personal opinions, which is that I do believe that providing parking along the edge of this corridor is a positive thing. And I do believe that pedestrian and bike facilities on this corridor are a positive thing. And I'm reluctant to shrink any of the pedestrian facilities, which was mentioned as a possible outcome of the transit. All of those things, you know, to me, I believe that the community would be best served pretty much with the 3-lane scenario. And this is a personal opinion. I'm not sure the board, Mountain Line board, shared this exactly. I think there was some, you know, some people on that side and some people on maintaining 4 lanes. But I that's my tendency is to push toward that 3-lane scenario. And I do think it'll integrate well with transit future.
So if I can throw something out here, I walk around this area a ton in between meetings, and in the summer, the amount of tourists is just off the charts. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only non-tourist for blocks, and this is a prelude to saying I'm agreeing with you, Don. I feel like in this area, our community will be best served by having enhanced walking and biking, and I'm totally okay sacrificing a little bit of throughput. And I don't think we need to sacrifice much parking. And for this specific area, not everywhere across the valley, but this specific area, I think that's the best solution. It's the 3-lane.
Well, one thing that, you know, I'm sure people a lot smarter than me about transportation have already thought about this a long time, but you know, this bridge doesn't exactly connect to either of the on-ramps. And there's a lot of people who still use it for that purpose, who sort of flow through Higgins and then go up or down Broadway to get to, you know, Orange or Van Buren. And, you know, maybe what you're suggesting, Josh, and what it was in my brain is that it might be okay if that was a little slowed down and we sort of push traffic around the perimeter.
I'm absolutely suggesting that. I feel like this area, though people do use it as a throughput, it's okay to be a little bit slower here, given that there's options east and west that don't have this same sort of destination feel to them. They are entirely existing as throughputs.
I think there's a lot of unknowns yet, but I think one of the things that we do know is that this corridor has presented some issues for a long time that need to, so doing nothing is, you know, the least favorable option here. And I think that over the years, we as a community have made a commitment to be more equitable in terms of our transportation, the distribution of our transportation infrastructure. And this presents a good opportunity, I think, for us to really look at how we best address that issue. Because it is an issue. I think we have a lot of our constituents, a lot of community members telling us that this is not a safe environment for them to travel on. Something has to change. But I completely agree that consistency between north and south is really important. So I think we got a little bit more to do, more thinking to do in terms of how to make all of that happen. But I'm glad that we're having this planning exercise, because it's gonna set us well for when we can actually pull the trigger if we have the money to do it.
And I have one more comment, and that is, you know, the situation with the bridge, while challenging, I think definitely can be overcome. What I see the bigger challenge is, what are we going to do with the 2.5 blocks as part of the NH route? That's also, I mean, that is the Highway 12. And we can't lose sight that we've got, you know, is there another way to get Highway 12 where we want it to be? Is that something that we want to look at? Do we want to take this completely off the NH route, the tail end of the upper end of Brooks? Do we take that completely off the NH route I have no idea what the hell that even looks like or how to do it. But I do know that when you pull up the map on how I want to get from A to B, and I want to stay on the national highway system, there's 2.5 blocks to Higgins that's part of the national highway system.
Yeah.
And
well,
I mean, if this was easy, everybody else, it would already been solved and we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of room for creative ideas, and trying to get consistency across the corridor, but recognizing some of those unique places like Highway 12. And can we preserve some of that capacity while also doing the other things that we want to do on the corridor? I think is an interesting question that we can spend some time on to see if that's a possibility. And I think there is, especially in that section. So, the other issues are truck turning movements. If we're doing, from 5th or 6th on to Higgins, are they going to be able to accommodate? Because you watch, when we were doing our open house at the senior center, I was watching a couple of large, sort of double trailer semis make that turn, which maybe we could argue on whether a truck of that size should be on Higgins or should be going through a residential neighborhood and turning onto Higgins. But today, they're doing it. And it's, they're out in the outside, the through lane of 5th, and so they're taking both lanes of 5th and turning into both through lanes of Higgins. And it's a big movement. Certainly not the most common, but I think those are some of the challenges that once we said, we think this is the alternative we want to move forward, we have to actually see if it works for all of these things and if there are changes. So I think that's the next step in the process, is working through all of those intersection details and looking at creative opportunities for capacity on Highway 12, or, what do we do with the bridge under that? To me, these concepts are really just the scratching of the surface. What do we think we want the corridor to look like? And then the next step is, how do we make that work? So.
Absolutely, Aaron. And just, recognizing that challenge, that if the people, I've said it before, the people in the Bitterroot that want to get to Helena to go to the state capitol, that's the route they use.
Yeah.
Hell, I was at my office the other day and I Googled how to get to a meeting I had to go to in Hamilton, and it sent me from my office north on Reserve to the interstate to circle back around and take Brooks because Reserve was so backed up.
Now, Google, I will say Google is not always, if you rely solely on GPS and Google, as we've seen, it can, in worst case scenario, lead you to your death. I think there's always a little bit of caution on that, but yeah, point well taken. And one of the things
that was the quickest route to get. Honestly, the quickest route was the local route that I came up with on my own to utilize some other roads to get around. I didn't add the 4 miles to the drive it recommended, but I also didn't go down Mullen and make a left onto Reserve.
Yeah. Right.
You'd still be there.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and one thing we're looking at, and we've got some preliminary data, but we're still, kind of cleaning it up, is looking at, we purchased some data sets from Streetlight, which is sort of aggregated cell phone data. So we're looking at sort of what are the trip characteristics of people who are going to or traveling through Higgins, and what does that look like? And I think, just on a preliminary note, we're seeing the vast majority of trips are localized and fairly short, upwards of 90% or more are in that 5 miles or less, which, even if that is, even partially true, means that we have, 5 miles or less mean that's a high opportunity mode shift trip. The trips that are 2 or 3 miles and less, which is another really big chunk of what we see on Higgins. Again, that's high opportunity for transit, walking, biking trips if you create the right facilities. So I think there's something to be said for, if we get the right facilities, we're not necessarily restricting traffic in the same way, because if you can get 10% of people to take a different mode, you've preserved your capacity for the next 15 years or so, and done it at a much lower cost than trying to expand a roadway. So I don't know. I think those are some of the details we need to sift through. What is that opportunity? Can we trust that data? And then how do we make these concepts work, whichever one we go through.
And what is the timeline wise? When do we need to make a decision on this? And should we be sending you comments?
Good question.
Or what's the next step?
So our next step is, we have our steering committee meeting, and hopefully we'll take all of this. I think we've had really good discussion here, and we'll bring all of that to the steering committee as well. including the, Bob, you or Jacqueline will be there, we'll have MDT there, and I think we can have the same sort of conversation about what do we want to try to move forward. So I would say, if you have ideas on these different alternatives, send them to us as soon as possible, like this week. And then
I got to run, everybody. I'm sorry, but I got to get in a meeting with Mac here in a minute, 1 minute. So I apologize.
You don't want
but
to
I
be
gotta
late
take
for
off.
that.
No, we've been playing phone tag all day, and we set a 3 p.m. time, so I got to get there.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Team.
So, so I guess, yeah, immediate comments on these concepts, get them to us this week or try to, and then we will move into, once we have some direction from the steering committee and feel like we're moving in a direction that is supported by the steering committee and the input that we've heard, we'll be in that period, like sort of that next several months of trying to refine the alternative or, develop that alternative. And there may be opportunities to come back to TTAC and TPCC with some ideas and vet those, or maybe it's just we get to a point where we think it works and we've ironed through all those challenges that we've identified, and then we'll have another round of public outreach this summer. We're shooting for sort of finishing this project and having a preferred alternative identified and adopted by late summer, early fall.
Great, thanks.
Aaron, who else on the steering committee?
Oh gosh, we have MDT, Mountain Line, City, and County. I think we have County.
Is Shane on there or Dave?
I don't think so. It might be more City and MDT focused, but we could certainly add someone. I think at this point, from.
I'd say just having Shane be involved would be fantastic.
Yep.
Thank you. So you can do that?
I think so. Let me check with our consultant. We can certainly invite him to that meeting. I don't think it would hurt at all. But then, we also have business community representative from both sides of the bridge. We have Downtown Association, Mountain Line. We have some representatives from Hellgate School. We have some students on the committee to get that perspective. So we try to have as diverse as possible in terms of sort of both public and private side, knowing that this is serving both of those interests.
Great. And so those meetings will be noticed and all that.
Yeah, they're noticed on our website. Again,
Great.
Steering committee, they're not always as public as some of these other meetings, but I think anyone who's interested in attending should get in touch and we can make that work.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. This is interesting and exciting stuff, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
So any last comments or questions on this item? Vicky.
Sorry, I jumped ahead. It wasn't on this item, so
Oh.
I'll just be quiet for a sec.
Well, we'll move quickly to our last item, and that's announcements and closing comments.
Okay, I've got one. Mostly just to let you know that although FTA funding is not my strong suit, finding answers to questions is, and kind of circling back to that tip question. So in the past, FTA didn't allow transfers of statewide 5339 funds, and now they do. So the expectation is that you guys will see that level of transfer for the next few years, or at least in the future years.
That's good news. Great. Thank you for that. Okay, any last comments? Seeing none. Thank you, everyone, for apologies for your attendance today, and have a really good rest of the afternoon. And